This attack happened.
Thank you, and a warm welcome to today's, I believe, third session of the afternoon. It's going to be a special session as I'm joined by Yuliana Shemetovets, the spokesperson of the Belarusian Cyber Partisans. The Belarusian Cyber Partisans has been responsible for a couple of high-profile cyber attacks in recent years. I just want to mention two here before we start a conversation for about 30 minutes, and then I'll open the floor for questions from the audience. The first one was a major operation against the railway system in Belarus that influenced the troop movement from Russian to Ukraine, both its ground troops as well as its artillery. The second was an operation that led to the stealing of a lot of documents, including the passports of, I believe, all Belarusian citizens, including that of Lukashenko himself. We'll get to that in a second. Now, when we think about the landscape of all these hacking groups that are out there, often many different labels are used. Sometimes people talk about cyber mercenaries, for instance, in the context of NSO groups selling spyware to governments. We hear the term cyber proxies sometimes being used, or semi-state actors. We hear hacktivist or hacktivism, such as anonymous. As a kind of an opening question to you, Yuliana, what do you think is the best way to describe the Belarusian cyber partisans?
It's a good question. We like to use the term hacktivist, though it doesn't describe probably that well, just because we can't compare to any other hacktivist groups right now operating or operated previously, just because of the uniqueness of cyber partisans. Though for Belarusian journalists, we try to teach them this word because it's not very well used. It's not very well known in Belarus or in Eastern Europe, so they sometimes call us hackers, which is not true. But what we like the most, I guess, the label or the description of the group is the digital resistance group, because it contains the goal for the group is to resist the oppression regime using the tools that are available for us.
And when you say resisting the regime, can you explain this a bit more on when you were formed, how you resist the regime, and what your goals are?
Sure. So the group was officially formed on September 5th of 2020 after the protests started in Belarus. In 2020, Lukashenko again rigged the elections. That time, that was different. Many people actually went to the streets to protect their votes. And people went out to streets, not only the capital of Belarus in Minsk, but in smaller towns, villages, all over Belarus. Crazy amounts of people went out. And it was brutally suppressed. Around 40,000 people went through prisons, organized tortures, beatings, rapes, inhuman conditions. Some were killed. So as a response to this violence, people tried to do something about it. And we couldn't openly fight against this regime or even defend ourselves. So Cyber Partisans decided to use what they know best, to use their knowledge, expertise in order to fight this regime, first it was more like a symbolic actions. They hacked the national television and the internet. They showed video clips of how people were brutally beating up on the streets because some could have not known or seen or even wanted to believe in that just because they lived in this illusion that Lukashenko protect them. Because there is still, and even now, some followers of Lukashenko, though the majority of people are against him, as these elections showed in 2020 when people actually went out and voted. And according to some independent sources, it was proved that Lukashenko was not selected by the people. So first it was more symbolic, even though the attacks low range, maybe not as sophisticated attacks started almost right away, DDoS attacks, for example. But then the group was developing their operations, their capabilities, and more people joined also. The group started with 5 people. I think the founder of the group left the message at the website that he defaced and left the encrypted message, and who decrypted it received the email address, and they managed to contact each other. So that's how the group was formed, with 5 people. Then it grew to 15. It also joined the Supportive movement, which means resistance in Belarusian. It has 2 other groups, people on the ground. One group is a self-defense brigade, people who would protect people during protests, organize protests in the future, or if they started back in 2021. Then there is another group called the Flying Storks. They're focusing on physical impact operations. Many of these people from the Flying Storks group now fighting in Ukraine in the Kostuy-Skalinovsky regiment. But still many people stayed in Belarus. And we also, in the Supportive movement, have a kind of political subgroup that is responsible for the strategy, that is responsible for connecting with other Belarusian opposition groups, trying to cooperate with others and setting up goals. Cyber Partisans, the representative of the Cyber Partisans, are part of this council that makes decisions, but in some cases, they're also very independent, just because it's very sensitive what they're doing. The operations cannot be shared. Like, I wouldn't know when the next attack happens, or specifically what's the target, and probably will be informed 10 minutes before it goes public. So for them, the rules a little bit different, but still they're part of a larger coalition. So by the July 2021, when the biggest hack happened, the hack of the Minister of Internal Affairs, there were already 15 people. Then it grew to 30, and then after the war started, more people joined, and there are now around 60 people. And when I say 60, sometimes people say, wow, it's so many people joined Cyber Partisan group, which kind of actually not true. We try to advocate and recruit more people just because it's all volunteers. So one can just spend that amount of hours on any work, and it's not only operations. We develop safe means of communication, we analyze data, we provide data for the Ukrainian government, for Belarusian journalists, or political figures. So in that sense, 60 is still not a lot, and we're trying to make it even a bigger movement.
So we got a lot to unpack here, right? So we have the Cyber Partisans, that is part of a bigger movement, the Supportive movement, that is one arm. There are 2 other arms, the Flying Storks,
yes,
that is responsible for more kinetic operations, and then the Self-Defense Squad, that is mostly there for training videos and education.
Materials, education. We also try to build up groups around Belarus in different cities that can go and train and educate themselves, how to protect, how to, especially during protest. And the Flying Storks is more about, they also have some groups, underground groups, also educational materials on like sabotage, some partisan actions that are part of non-violent actions still. Even when we're talking about strikes or sabotage, it's all part of that.
And you mentioned the group has, the Cyber Partisans, has grown over time. It was a small group, right, of a handful of people that in the digital domain resisted the Belarusian regime. It is now bigger. Can you tell us a bit more about the tasking of the organization? Should we think of a lot of hackers behind keyboards that are doing these operations, or are there many other people that are part of the Belarusian Cyber Partisans?
Mostly it consists of IT specialists. Belarus is actually a well-known IT hub in Eastern Europe. We have a lot of experts. We have a lot of people working in the IT sector. So it's been known for this for some time. So it was kind of an understandable step or like a creative way to fight the regime. And Belarusians actually support like Cyber Partisans group a lot for that reason, trusting their capabilities and their expertise. So mostly they're, yes, IT specialists. After the war started, they're mostly Belarusians. Before the war, especially, they consist only of Belarusians. After the war started, there are some foreigners that also joined the group. It doesn't mean that they participate in the direct attacks. We understand from a legal perspective it's not good for them, and we also don't advise and don't advocate. But there are so many tasks you can do. Some people, let's say, just write codes that can be scripts that can be used in the attacks. Some write scripts and help us with analyzing or connecting or building search tools in the databases that have been obtained. So data analysis is a big job for people. Then there are also people like editing posts, like me talking to media and thinking through the PR strategy, how to show the data, how to build out this trust among the public, especially in Belarus. Obviously, that's our target, but also in Western countries. So we're not viewed as some hackers. So it's like not just to dump, like, I don't know, the gigabytes of information or like thousands of names, people who work for KGB, but like releasing it either slowly or strategically. Let's say when the war started, we had these white trap conversations that were recorded at the embassies, and then we didn't publish it during, like, before or during, right after a couple of days when the war started, just because, people didn't care about that much. But after some time, when the rumors especially appeared that Putin wants Belarusian soldiers to enter and start to join their forces in Ukraine, then we thought that that's a good time to create maybe some mistrust or like misunderstanding between Belarusian and Russian regime. So yes, there are people that are not IT specialists, but most of them still somehow related to IT fields, either data analysis or pen testers or developers.
Yeah, before we turn to some of the operational activity that the Cyber Partisans has been involved in, one more organizational question, because there seems to be a bit of a dilemma here for the group in that there is a trade-off between the willingness to scale up your organizational activities, but also the question of who do you trust? How many people can we have within the group? You mentioned, we do this through maybe a riddle or a code or something that you have to decrypt, and if you do, you can maybe join us. But I'm sure that that's not the only security element that you build in to make sure you can have a group that is actually operational.
For sure.
Can you tell us a bit more about that, about perhaps these struggles that exist?
Well, I'm not going to share the protocol because it's we have a lot of Belarusian KGB actually trying to infiltrate the group, and there are different steps for sure, because still we need to save the anonymity of all the members, so the information has not been shared, considering especially those people that's still in Belarus. We still have Belarusian from the Cyber Partisans group that operate inside, and then they can face capital punishment if they're caught, because Belarusian Cyber Partisans were labeled as a terrorist group in Belarus, which can lead to the capital punishment. So there are different levels, and the process is pretty long. It takes time, and I know even some people were writing to me in frustration, trying to speed up the process, and I tried to explain it takes time to verify according to the protocol we created. We also have a code of conduct, so people need to read the rules and, kind of sign off that they're going to follow the ethics within the group, because we do have a set of rules that we follow. So like making sure that the person shares the value, that's kind of was important for me when I joined the group, making sure that we share the same values, the same understanding, and the same strategy. And also, it takes time. So, and in the beginning, obviously, even if the person is trusted or someone recommended, this person never gonna get like very important or like tasks that are depend on some security issues. It will start slowly, and then only over time, when we can see that the person is a truly member of the team, works well, can actually spend a lot of time on this, a lot of the free time, because again, we're all volunteers, so it's a lot of work. Maybe some can set up a good schedule at their workplace, but maybe it's after, during weekends, so that just making sure that the person can spend enough time to contribute to the group. So that's a long process.
And then you were appointed as the spokesperson of the group. Should I see you as a member of the group, merely as a spokesperson of the group? Are you out of it, but you relay their message? How do you see it yourself? And what was the reason for the group to actually appoint you as the spokesperson?
Sure, so let me answer the first one. I'm not participating in any hacks. I don't know any sensitive information for security reasons, as I'm the only public person, and definitely we don't want anything to be leaked in case, let's say, I'm captured or something like that. So in that sense, I try to be isolated from very sensitive and important tasks, yet I'm still a member of the group. I still have a vote in the strategies, in the new projects, as for example an NFT project that we probably will discuss later, and then a communication between other opposition groups, because we try to cooperate, we try to unite the Belarusian opposition, and that is kind of my role sometimes also in that more political way of doing things. But I try to be more isolated in the beginning, meaning I would say, they and me, but now I realized I say we, just because, over time I do feel like a member, and obviously I'm accepted as a member. But again, there's still a separation of responsibilities, and it not only works for me, it also works for other members. The ones who work with the data, they're not going to be involved in the attacks. The ones who are in the attacks, they don't have any access to databases, and vice versa. So that's what we try to distribute, how we try to distribute the work. It's in a sense decentralized, but then it's also centralized, just because we have a voting sometimes also of the projects, or let's say the direction the group wants to take. And also, they have a representative, as I mentioned before, who they chose to be a person of contact with other organizations, journalists as well, someone who is anonymous, and also the person who represents the group at the council that is from a larger coalition that makes a lot of strategic decisions as well, with whom to work, whom we can trust, what sources we can use, and things like that.
But you have a group that is being incredibly active and successful, is seen and designated in Belarus as a terrorist organization, of which all of its members, to my knowledge, are anonymous or maybe online on certain handles, except you. That puts a lot of pressure on you in terms of your own safety, perhaps the safety of your family. Would you be willing to discuss that a little bit more or not? The choices that you had to make also to represent the organization.
Yeah, that's right. It was a hard choice. I first said no. I was afraid. I didn't want to put my family in danger. But then my friends got detained and nothing was changing. And I always been active, so I was in a sense on the list of opposition activists anyway. And I realized we have to do everything. I think you also asked about why is it important to have a spokesperson. I haven't answered, so that's also a very important actually role to explain to Western countries, to Western experts about who the cyber partisans are. In the beginning, there was a lot of distrust. They've been considered as hackers or the proxy actors. So that is an important role to explain, to advocate about what's going on in Belarus, to bring people's attention, especially after the war started. And we do understand that Ukraine is very important for us too, and from many, from moral perspective, strategic perspective, from many things we help as much as we can, but we also want to save our own country. People are still getting detained almost every day. They go through horrible conditions in prisons for no reasons. So this oppression continues, and we obviously want to bring people's attention to this, explain, build up some reputation. So again, journalists can trust us, use the data, help to investigate what the crimes, help to reveal spies, both Belarusian spies working abroad, but also the spies that were recruited in Ukraine by the Russian FSB and had meetings in Belarus. But without the reputation, without the being good at explaining what you're doing, connecting with different institutions, getting also a lot of advice from academia, which is really helpful, it is hard to operate properly. And as for security, yes, I'm trying to be as careful as possible. We know that cyber partisans are on the list of target number one for the Belarusian regime. And I had to stop talking to my mom, who's still in Belarus, just because it's not safe for her even check on my health. And we never discuss politics. We never discuss my work with cyber partisans. Yet I still cannot talk to her since they went to our old apartment and tried to destroy it because officially I was recorded there. So there are some public attacks on me too, again labeling as a terrorist, saying as if I'm giving orders, and creating some untrue stories about how we went after children or parents of the special police officers, which is absolutely not true. It's against our ethics to go. We only reveal information about those who committed crimes against the Belarusian people. So in that sense, there is a pressure, but I can compare that with people who are in prison. I can compare it with people who are now fighting in Ukraine and dying in Ukraine, trying to support and save and protect the sovereignty of Ukraine, the freedom of Ukraine, but also, in a sense, the sovereignty of Belarus and the freedom of Belarus, because without a free Ukraine, there is no chance for Belarus as well. So in that sense, I believe they're heroes. I'm just trying to be my best.
And then we've now indeed... You've mentioned a couple of different activities that Belarus has been involved in. I mentioned to myself, not to give a completely comprehensive overview of all the activity that the cyber partisans have been involved in, but could you lay out this a bit more? What are the type of things that you've done, and perhaps with some examples too for the audience?
Sure. I think the biggest attack and the one that we are most proud of is the hack of the railway systems. It was very effective. It was a very difficult operation, even considering that the Belarusian regime used very old software, not updating it, key infrastructure. You would never believe what they used, like Windows XP. So key infrastructure, insane. But Lukashenko didn't want to invest money into this. Not all of the computers are run on Windows XP, obviously, in the railways, but some are, which again, it was shocking for the group. And that's one of the things they want to work on, is building proper cyber defense once the regime is gone, because they're investing money into the special police forces, and then they didn't invest money in order to protect the data of the citizens, their own data, their own sensitive information, and the railways. So the attack on the railways started in December. It was anonymous. It wasn't for public. Even I didn't know about about this. I think around 40% of the computers were destroyed, and a lot of people were fired. So that's the thing about Belarusian authorities, illegitimate authorities. They would never accept that the group of IT specialists, Belarusian specialists, are damaging regimes so badly. Like in the sense of like actual physical damage, things are just not working. About the reputation, that in December or even before, we know that Chinese companies were kind of complaining that they cannot rely on Belarusian railways and transport their goods to Europe because Belarus is in the center of Europe, geographical center of Europe. Before the war, a lot of goods from Russia would go, or other countries in China as well. So they're like, we can't rely. It's bad for the reputation, and of course, it's bad for reputation when an average journalist has more access to the sensitive information on special agents than these special agents on average police officer in Belarus has. So they would never believe that it's this, and they try not to accept it. So instead, they're just firing people working in IT department of the railways, let's say. So they think there is a mole, there is a rat inside, and that is the reason why the railways was hacked. They pretend not to believe that it's an outsider job in a sense. So then the second attack happened in January when the Russian troops arrived to Belarus for the joint exercises, as they claimed before. And it was important to make this attack public just because we wanted to show that we're against the potential deoccupation of Belarus, which in fact happened. We are against that the Russian troops can freely go and be in Belarus and have these joint exercises. For what reason? And that attack wasn't directed on the trains in general. It was directed at the freight trains, commercial trains, in a sense trying to slow down the movement of military trains. Also, Cyber Partisans in the January attack had access to the automation systems, emergency systems, but they didn't know what to do with them, in a sense like they were afraid if they're going to shut it down, they might create some emergency situations. But after this attack went public, a lot of people reached out, especially once the war started. And then some people who used to work for the railways, and then they explained how the system works, what needs to be focused, like where they need to, Cyber Partisans focus on, what to attack, what to aim, in order not to create emergency situations for general public. So then the major attack, two attacks actually happened in the end of February and beginning of March after the war started, and that attack turned off the automation systems, which are responsible for the setting up the roads, the semaphores, traffic lights. The movement of trains stopped completely, and the movement after these two attacks, and in combination of the attacks on the ground from partisans, the movement of Russian military trains stopped completely. It was too risky for them to use the Belarusian railways, especially transporting, the artillery, equipment, solarium or gasoline, or Russian troops, of course, too. So they decided it's too risky. So I think that was definitely for us the most important attack. It helped to save lives in Ukraine. Even one life is already, what you can hope for. And we know that, of course, it's Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian volunteers, any other volunteers that are protecting Kyiv and Kyiv area. But the disruption of the logistics in Belarus, because from Belarus it's easy, that's where the attacks started, coming from Belarus onto Kyiv, Bucha, Kyiv area, all of these cities. Even if we contributed like 1%, 0.01%, we still consider it as the most successful and the most effective, just because it helped to save lives, and that's what we tried to do. And I think another attack that was pretty significant, and that what I think drew people's attention to Cyber Partisans is the hack of the Ministry of Internal Affairs when they obtained the passport information of every citizen in Belarus, including Lukashenko, including his son. They managed to find even his mom, which is a great mystery in Belarus. I don't want to share any gossips, but yeah, it's a big thing. And then they also obtained information on KGB agents, wire-trapped conversations, some video clips of the detention centers where peaceful protesters would be brought in. And this massive information is still very helpful in trying to investigate the crimes and reveal people who are responsible for the crimes.
And on the first operations against the railway, to unpack this a bit more, and also the relationship with the war in Ukraine. Clearly, the activities that the Belarusian cyber partisans have done have aided, as you say, the war efforts from Ukraine against Russia. But equally, you seem to have been careful for not targeting any infrastructure in Ukraine and only targeting infrastructure in Belarus. And equally, you have been careful with saying we are supportive of the Ukrainian IT army, but we don't associate with them. Is that correct? And what is the exact relationship here?
So we are in contact with a number of Ukrainian hacktivist groups. First of all, it's really hard to verify some of the groups that reach out. We don't work with Russian hacktivist groups. We just can never be sure that they're not proxy actors. We actually tried to get in contact with IT Army, but it just never happened. I can't even tell you the reason. They're just doing their job. They still targeting a little bit differently and the way they're working is different from Cyber Partisans, but we're in touch with other hacktivist groups because many of the accesses that Cyber Partisans have, they can lead to Russian infrastructure, Russian companies, Russian organizations. Something can be set up similarly so Cyber Partisans can share their experience, their tools with the groups they trust. So we are in cooperation with Ukrainian hacktivist groups. And we are working with the Ukrainian government, with many departments on providing data, on verifying people who are coming to Ukraine, and also giving information about the movement of Russian military troops, whatever we can have, whatever we can assist, and on the Belarusian soldiers, because there were several campaigns targeting Belarusian soldiers, showing them what's happening in Ukraine, and explain to them so they don't join the Russian forces and don't come to Ukraine to basically die for no reason.
And so we have this disruptive activity, and then we have the doxing activity as well, the release of public information that you have obtained through various channels. Tell us a bit more how this activity has evolved over time. You've mentioned these two cases. Most recently, there was you created an NFT of copies of Lukashenko's passport. What's going on there? There seem to be a lot of interesting things going on where you're truly innovative. Can you share a bit more about the reason?
We need funds. We need funds for the servers where we store this very sensitive information, and it was obviously government's responsibility to protect the data. It's now our responsibility to protect this data. They did a bad job. Now we're trying to do a much better job. Like passport information, for example, is saved on the server that is isolated from the internet, and a few have true access to it. And then the funds go there. The funds go to the tools, some activities. We do publish a report once in a while, and that was just our fun way to create this NFT in order to raise funds, but also to humiliate Lukashenko, because it's his real information that Cyber Partisans obtained from the databases, not only Lukashenko, but his other high-level supporters and traitors and criminals who went against the Belarusian people. And it's also kind of a historic moment, I would think. In Belarus, people got used to Cyber Partisans activities so much that, oh yeah, they have passport information, so what? Like in Western world, like when people ask me, they're like, how is it possible? It's insane. It happened for the first time, like in history. So like we try to kind of cherish the moment and also share it with people who want to become a part of this moment, a part of this movement, because it is a hard one. They're working hard during nights, over weekends, and this is like something to also, in a sense, to cherish this hacktivist opportunity, hacktivist movement, that someone can just get a passport of one of the last dictator in Europe, and hopefully, he's gone soon, and it's going to become a history, a reminder of people. If you don't participate into democracy, if you let these develop and try not to be political, as many Belarusians did, that's the results you're going to get too. So,
for the people now who quickly went on their phone to try and buy the Lukashenko NFT, unfortunately, that is no longer possible.
It is possible.
By OpenSea.
Listen, it was delisted by OpenSea. We redid it. No one can stop Cyber Partisans. We are very creative, so we made sure that it's not going to be censored, and we publish it on a different platform. You can find it on Twitter. Follow Cyber Partisans. I think one of the latest posts are about this NFT new collection, and it hasn't been delisted. It's been on for a couple of days.
It's still on there in case you want to buy.
So we covered some of the numbers, so we're not get censored. But for someone who really want to know the Lukashenko's passport number, please reach out. We are not, greedy. We will provide it for you.
I have two more questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience. And the first one is, someone can come and say to you, well, you mentioned you're the Cyber Partisans, but how can you prove this? Are you truly authentic? We've seen many groups today. There is a group out there called Predatory Sparrow that is conducting operations against Iran, has been highly successful, targeting a steel mill, targeting petrol stations. But many will say, well, this is likely Israel behind it. We've had other covers, Cutting Sword of Justice, where it was perhaps Iranian government themselves that were behind some of these notorious operations. What would you say to people? Well, are you really authentic? Are you not a cover for some maybe government entity?
If we were a cover for some government entity, we would bring so much more harm to the Belarusian regime. It's just impossible, first of all, to conduct all the operations that, especially now when Cyber Partisans have access to. But also, it's really hard for any group to work under someone else's supervision, because obviously any other country, even though we want to be obviously part of Europe, we are a European country, still we want to be an independent. We want to make sure we can decide how we want to develop, how our economy should, in what regional maybe unions it needs to be integrated. Might not be European Union. It might not be like a super close ally with the United States. We need to consider like other countries around us. But also, I think the easiest explanation will be no one cares about Belarus enough. No one cared before, no one cares. I mean, yes, there is a lot of attention. We receive a lot of help from Polish government, from Lithuania, Baltic states. They do support opposition. But in a general state, there is no proper strategy of Western countries towards Belarus. It probably was more or less about Ukraine, even though we're in shock how the way Ukrainians fought for, their country, because, I know that some of the experts in the United States were giving 48 to 70 hours for Ukrainians to surrender when Russia started the war, just because data-wise they thought Russia is so much more powerful than Ukraine, and only we were saying no, there is no way Ukraine will give up so easily. Countries that are neighbors with Ukraine and know them well. So in that sense, I can't even see anyone being that interested in order to create a proxy group that would try to to target Lukashenko. I mean, obviously the democratic society supports us, but then it was convenient for some of the politicians, for some of the countries to make business with Belarus, to have a more or less peaceful region. Yeah, he's a dictator, but yet he's more or less okay in a sense that he doesn't let migrants to come until 2020 happened. We can do real politics and find some kind of common ground until they saw a real face of Lukashenko, until they finally heard what we were screaming about before. So that would be one reason. And another one, like we've been kind of checked by many journalists, experts, organizations, and nonprofit organizations that were reaching out to us, trying to see, what kind of data they can obtain, they can get to verify that this data was actually obtained and it's authentic, not only on passport information, but on the work history, taxes, the crossing of the border in Belarus. They obtained also information on that, on any citizen, not only Belarus, in the last 15 years, which again is very helpful for Ukraine right now. And so this was a kind of process of verification. And the reputation also, obviously in the beginning there were many questions, which was quite understandable, but since the group is still going on and pretty successful and open about what they're doing for 2 years, there is just more trust from many actors in West and other regions as well.
And of course, some of the activities have aided other organizations as well, such as Bellingcat, where some of your information was used in Bellingcat's investigation of both the Wagner Group as well as some Russian spies that were uncovered in Naples. As a closing question, clearly there's a strong moral case that you made here on the importance of the Belarusian cyber partisans and their activities. But there might also be a trade-off here with morality and legality, where within Belarus, it's clearly not legal what you're doing, designated as a terrorist organization. And internationally, it can be questionable as well, particularly if some of the members of the Belarusian cyber partisans are not in Belarus, but in other countries, helping or aiding the activities that you're doing there. What do you say to that? Is there this trade-off? Should we not be worried about it? What is the role of Europe there? Give us a sense.
I agree that it is a very important question, and we're open, as we said before and saying now, that we're open to collaborate, answer questions, because the hacktivist movement is something new. It's a gray zone. It's not even in the policy papers. It is in policy papers, but it didn't make it into proper international laws. We were just discussing the latest CyCon in Estonia was part of the discussion. It was very interesting to see how it's going to develop, what the rights potentially for these hacktivist groups, how they can operate. So I think it's something new, and as something new, we need to work on it. We need to make sure that different actors are considered, and especially in the Cyber Partisans case, we're not doing it for fun. We're actually fighting for people's lives. And according to even the United Nations Charter, the nation has the right to protest, to stand up against the oppressive regime, which clearly what we have in Belarus, there's so many proofs that everyone has, just on any social media or anywhere you can understand the crimes that the regime committed. So I think even from a moral perspective, understandable, we get a lot of support, but even from a legal perspective, we're fighting against the dictator. We're trying to transition to democracy, and we're using the means that are available for us. We are not going and creating some civil war. We're using the modern technologies, the skill set, the ethics that we have in order to fight a very strong, very consolidated regime in Belarus, that are responsible for death, that responsible for tortures, beatings, and responsible for now war crimes in Ukraine as well. So the level even went up. So I understand, and we again try to be as open-minded, and we agree to collaborate. Like I shared the code of conduct with some of the organizations that were interested in the legalities, because it is something new. But as in the history, let's say Polish solidarity during the Second World War and after, they had the full support from West when they were fighting against the communism. The Charles de Gaulle's resistance in France was also fully supported by the Great Britain and other Western countries. In the West, we understand someone just forgot what it's like, what it takes to fight the dictators. And that's what we are doing right now. We're fighting for our lives. We're fighting for independence. We fight against Russia as well, because Putin does not consider Belarus as an independent state. He doesn't consider Belarus a nation as a nation, like he doesn't consider Ukrainian nation as a nation. So now for us, the question of basically survival of the country, survival of the people, of culture, of the language, of everything. So we want to have these legal discussions one day, as many Western countries now have, but we don't have the ability, doing everything possible in order to save our country.
Let's open the floor for questions. I am not entirely sure how much time we have left. I will have to look at the audience once the lights are changed and I can see you all sitting there as well. But let's open the floor for questions straight away. If someone can change the lights so I can see the audience and point to potentially people raising their hands.
Hey, just over here in the middle.
I can.
No, it's not you. It's just us. We're starting to see you now. Please.
When you were talking a little bit about the structure of the organisation itself, it reminded me a lot of some historical resistance groups, like the Provisional IRA, for example. Would you be able to talk about what kind of groups you learned lessons from, or drew some inspiration from? And then as a second part as well, I imagine that there's a lot of different considerations that might go into a strictly online resistance group as opposed to in-person kinetic kind of operations. What are those challenges? How does it shake out in different ways, I guess?
And just to add one point there, perhaps also clarify to what degree you are strictly online or not, and to how much you actually benefit maybe from human access or human sources on the ground. So dual question.
As for the second one, how we benefit, yes, we receive information internally from people on the ground, which is very important, especially about the movement of Russian military troops. And people do trust cyber partisans. First of all, one of the main reasons why sometimes people in Belarus don't want to share the information with the opposition groups, because they're afraid. They think that these can be leaked, or someone will realize, that they provided this information, and thus they can be detained. So Cyber Partisans created safe bots. People trust the reputation of Cyber Partisans, so they actually provide this information. Also, Cyber Partisans created a partisan Telegram, which is based on the open source of the Telegram. And people that use it, they can safely be in contact with Cyber Partisans or follow the news. Because, for example, in Belarus, you can be randomly searched, and if a police officer sees that you follow the groups and you message, they can detain you. And majority of people in Belarus, given according to the statistics, use Telegram. So this Telegram has some features. You can set up fake passwords, and then if you give the phone, this information will be deleted. Also, Cyber Partisans are very realistic about the extent which they can achieve. So that's why they partnered with people on the ground. They formed a larger coalition. We understand that just by hacking and getting all this information, or even if you shut down everything, all the utilities, other infrastructure, it doesn't mean Lukashenko will go away. Obviously, you need people on the ground. It's the same you can see in the Ukrainian war. Yes, the cyber aspect is important. It sometimes starts with the cyber operations, and then Russians would attack. Yet the decisive factor is on the ground, and we understand that in the Belarusian case, a lot can be done through the cyber cyber operations, but still we need the support from people, from the general population. We need to find this moment when people go out, because, from many perspectives, we need to understand that people care and then they want it. It's not only we, the opposition in other states, want this change. So this is important. And that's what we are trying also to work with the population, give them some tools how they can be in touch, so how they can still stay in this political affiliation, the political opposition groups, because people are afraid in Belarus, people are oppressed, depressed, and and also now they're very affected by the Russian propaganda, so we try to block it, we try to be in touch and in contact. And I already forgot your first question, but I think it was also important.
Is there any analogies or lessons
the inspirations? Yeah, we actually read a lot, we analyze data, we actually analyzed all of the revolutions or rising ups, and then the data showed us that, I know that in the West they like this guy, I think the last name Sharp, who was talking about that non-violent methods, which actually includes more than just peaceful protests, and people sometimes miss this part. But also we analyzed data. He mostly focused on the protest in this autocratic states, and on the states where the regime decided not to use violence against the population. But we analyzed the revolutions where the regime, we analyzed all of the revolutions, the data sets and stuff, and then the results showed that if you don't use active kinetic force in the consolidated regime that started violence, there is 0% chance you can overthrow such a regime. So we are very serious about the history, what other cases we can learn from. Polish solidarity would be one of them. IRA, obviously, we studied it. Also, we studied a lot how the Israeli state was founded, how they operated, lobbied their interests, united all the Jewish people around the world and formed the state. So that would be the ones. But of course, I think number one would be like Polish case, just because they're neighbors. We share the common history. We understand how the communist regime affected. So we do study, and we take it very seriously.
We know that authoritarian states like to use digital technologies themselves, sometimes very efficiently. They also try to control digital infrastructure, sometimes more or less successfully. You briefly touched on it upon this already, but could you expand on the state of digital infrastructure in Belarus and digital maturity of the regime?
Good question. Let's say in Belarus, the wide trap conversation, so all of the mobile operators are working with the regime, are cooperating. So what we recommend for any activists inside Belarus is either to buy a SIM card from another country or buy, let's say, a virtual number and then register Signal or any other application, Telegram, on this number. So there is some list of advice that we provide for people in Belarus, how they can use internet safely, because the regime is watching you. And in Belarus, everything been recorded. On the other hand, they are not as good as, let's say, Russia, as we know. Like, Russian regime has professional hackers, they have much better infrastructure, they have the tools. In Belarus, it's just not available. For Lukashenko, they don't have enough financing. They never thought through this. Also, there are not many people that are ready to work for the regime in IT sector. Why would you, if you can earn much more money, be free, travel, and be on the right side? So that's what they actually have problems, especially after the protests of 2020, when they fired even more people, because in IT sector they think that you cannot trust anyone because they're more modernized, they have exposure to Western world. In Belarus, it's a common thing. Like, if you're in IT, you live like a king, in a sense. Like, you have very good quality of life. So there's just not many incentives for people to work in the regime sector, and that is one of the reasons why it's so inefficient. Yet they still use Soviet technologies in order to follow people, like the methods and techniques. So the cameras all over that recording people, the as I mentioned before, the wide trap conversations. But it's not impossible for us to try and disrupt this work, though it's still, we advise people to be very, very careful inside Belarus.
I see a couple of questions in the back. Let's go from right to left. Shall we take the questions? How much time do we still have? I realize we're already over time in a way. Max 10 minutes. So let's take these first 3 questions together. Perhaps one more round to end it or not. Let's see where we are in 10 minutes.
Okay. First of all, thanks for giving insights about the operations. One thing that really confused me is the NFT thing. So, in my understanding, NFTs are a Ponzi scheme or plain fraud. How does this fit into your visions and ethics and morals of all this?
That's a good question. To be fair, I'm sorry.
Let's ask this one. No, let's address it head on, and then we'll move to the other two. No, of course. Please.
Yeah, we actually open to expertise in this field. We try to study it and understand from a moral perspective if we can do it. I know we were not into NFT and stuff, and then someone actually, when we were brainstorming the ways to raise the funds, someone offered this as an opportunity. We see it as not participating in a scheme because it's unclear. It's still kind of a gray zone, but more like a creative way to raise funds, because that's what we realize. You need to give people an incentive for them to make donations, especially considering that for now we only accept cryptocurrencies. In the future, yes, hopefully within a month we will have PayPal, which is definitely easier for people. But we are not sure, is it 100% scheme? The same as goes for cryptocurrencies, has been criticized originally, and now it becomes a serious thing in the finance world. The same goes to the NFT. We know that someone loves it, and there are people reaching out and asking us before actually why we didn't do it. And then yes, there are also critics, and we understand, we take it seriously, but we're not experts in this field, to be honest. And again, if there is some more information on this topic that we can discuss, share, and collaborate on, we would be definitely open to. But then for us, it's just the means to raise funds, to be honest. That's one of the only options that we have, and we chose to go with it. And it also, whenever it damages the regime, whenever it humiliates the regime, it's kind of 1 point for us.
I would like to follow up to. Is it on? I would like to follow up to a question before. There are sanctions active, from the EU, which are imposing restrictions on the flow of technology and dual-use goods. Is this not weakening, Belarus and the surveillance state? Maybe are they helping or not? Because you mentioned before there are a lot of Soviet techniques and technologies, but I was wondering if this has an impact.
Shall we take one more question at the back and
sure,
then answer them both?
Hi. Thanks for the discussion already. You mentioned at the beginning that the Belarusian KGB is trying to infiltrate the organization, right? And I've been wondering if you can say a bit more about how they're trying to do this, because it is curious. You mentioned the state has a lot of deficiencies in the digital sphere. So I wonder, is this just people trying to impersonate some of your members, or kind of physical infiltration, right? Or are they trying some kind of digital surveillance or phishing emails, things like that?
Thank you. Okay, I'll answer the first question first. So speaking about the sanctions, we do think they help for sure, but then you have pirate softwares. That's what Belarusian regime is now using. They buy pirate licenses, and yes, they can't update it on time, so that makes it easier to find weaknesses in the systems, so Cyber Partisans can break into it. But also we know that some of the companies, I'm not going to name them now because we don't have 100% proof, that they still try to work with the regime even after the sanctions were imposed. So they were trying to found some loopholes, which we try now to actually unravel it and make sure that these companies will stop doing this. Of course, we would appreciate help from many Western companies and make sure that they're not working with the regime. But it definitely made it easier. Not that it actually was a decisive moment, for sure not, but it added something to it. But as for the, let's say, cameras and surveillance technology, we know that the regime is buying it from China. So in that sense, they have ways and they found ways to get it, to obtain it, to install it, and to successfully use it. And we know that China is also watching it. It's kind of a case for them, a test case, how to suppress a revolution, and how you can also use digital tools, cameras, wiretapping calls, and things like that in order to suppress it. So there is a combination of this digital dictatorship part that are successful still, and it's coming from China, obviously. So that's definitely not a pleasant thing. And then as for the second question, we never noticed for now any cyber attacks on the group, meaning trying to leak the data or just get access to the phones. Yes, I received some messages with weird links and stuff like that, but that's just the extent of what probably they can do. They try to actually sign up for the group. They pretended to be someone and they're like, yeah, we can help. And we sometimes even make this joke, we needed people to test this partisan Telegram application, and we said, even agents can come and try because there's nothing sensitive about it. You can do a job for us, please. Because people were asking, you're so easy about accepting people for this job. We're like, yeah, we don't care. Let agents actually do something good for now, for once. But that's what their methods. They like this, or not that they like, they're just used to these methods to infiltrate the group, pretending someone as an insider learned from inside. So far, they were not successful, trying to be as careful. But as for the attacks, never happened so far, serious attacks, I mean. But again, if they try or will decide to collaborate with Russia, that might change. But again, I was asking this question too to my colleagues, and the answer was, we have such sensitive information and very sensitive accesses to infrastructure that even Lukashenko doesn't want to share it with Russians. It will have they will get too much power over Belarusian state of affairs. Lukashenko cares about it. Yes, they're allies, but he knows that the actual threat for now, the most powerful threat is coming from the east, from Russia and or his closest people, because even in a sense China, if they decide to do something, because it's easier for them to topple Lukashenko. And if they have accesses to very sensitive information and infrastructure, it becomes more dangerous for Lukashenko. So that might be the answer, but it's also speculations, of course.
Considering the interest of time, let's see if there's one more question in the audience, and then we'll wrap up. The gentleman in the middle.
Thank you very much for your information. And I have a question regarding surveillance technology that you have mentioned, telecommunications, wiretapping. Do you have any information about Western suppliers or even Swiss suppliers? Because there are some companies supplying IMSI catchers in Switzerland.
I don't think we come across any Swiss companies that still or used to help the regime. But to be fair, I don't know 100% the answer to this question. I'd rather check. Maybe you can leave the contact or something, and then I can answer your questions by double checking it with people who have this access or information. It's actually an interesting question about the Swiss companies. Obviously, yes, they're big names, but I think that even if there was some kind of contact after 2020 most Western companies withdrew their collaboration with the regime. It's just not worth it. The market is not as big, and they would face the consequences which just are not worth for them. But it's always good to double check. So let me get back to this.
Thank you, Juliana, for sharing your insights with
Max.
us today.
Thank
and
you.
please join me in thanking